Let's record. Recording in progress. So I understand on Friday, Tony Bagsby accidentally recorded to the cloud. I fixed it, I uploaded it, so it should be up in the YouTube playlist, the lecture. He probably told you to watch last month or the month before. But this month's lecture is up and ready to go if anybody's watching this archive. So today, lecture 10, this is actually part 3 of textures. We're going to be working on opacity maps. And for our purposes, alpha maps, opacity maps, same thing. Residing in the color map. So we can actually have an RGB file. Instead of just RGB, which is 24-bit, now we can add an extra 8 bits in our target file format, and that gives us the ability to have in extra information that we can pull from. So it's kind of like having 2 maps embedded in a single file. We're going to do projection mapping. When we do projection mapping, that also kind of brings us into layering inside of Maya. You guys have layered in Photoshop, you've layered in Substance. Now we're going to layer in Maya. And then just like Photoshop and Substance, Maya has blend modes, which allow our layers to interact with each other. We're not going to get time to do displacements. We always run out of time. And I'm going to save that for lecture 11 because it's not mandatory. We don't have any requirements for it, but it does create a nice look. We'll go over, if we have time, a couple of useful utilities that are inside Maya that might save you some work going into Photoshop and tweaking an image that you get in there. In particular, this one, the remap HSV utility, which allows us to remap the hue, saturation, and value of any file you have, bring it into Maya, and it gives us control over each channel. And what we're really interested in is the saturation part, because a lot of times you will get images with reds and greens and blues that are really close to those primary colors, and they will become oversaturated. So have a PDF for you guys here for layering. It's basically a quick comparison of Photoshop to Maya. All right, let's clear all that. So I will have office hours today, or not today, this week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So your final turn-in for project 7 will be due on Thursday before midnight. So we'll also be in Discord. Frank or Ari will be doing a Zoom lab for online and campus, optional. So that helps from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays. Like I said, we can share screen in Discord, but sometimes it gets to be a little cumbersome. And it's a lot easier if you're having an issue that requires a lot of screen share. Zoom certainly makes it a lot easier. So as I mentioned on our agenda today, we're going to be doing an opacity map, which is also basically an alpha channel. Inside the wine label. Precisely the color map of the wine label. If you are doing the exterior scene, this is required. We're going to cut that out. And we're going to be doing projections. We provide 2 logos for you. These projections need to be done in Maya, not in Substance. Just need one projection's all we need. And then usually when you work on wear and tear, if you have done layering in Photoshop or you've done layering in Substance, a lot of times it comes out as a composite map. But there are times when you want to layer it in Maya, just for ease of use, or because you're not completely sold on the look of it and you're trying a couple things out. Common layering blend modes. We've already talked about adjusting the base weight. We'll address that again. And then we'll get to this on Wednesday. We will definitely get to displacements, but today we'll probably at least get to this utility. Not sure we'll need the reverse. Reverse utility is nice because what it will do is if you've got a black and white file, you plug it in, say, for example, it's a bump map, and your bump is going in the wrong direction. Well, you can go in and give it a negative bump depth number. It'll flip for you. You can also plug in a reverse utility, and that will do the same thing. So you don't have to change the amount of bump at all. You can just plug this in, and it will automatically flip black and white. Now, it also works if you're trying to use a single map and you plug it in for, say, the spec. So black is no reflectivity, white is full reflectivity. And then you want to try and use that same map for another area, like maybe roughness, but it's giving you the reverse of what you want. So it's easier if you plug in the reverse utility. You may need it, you may not, but it's good to know it is there if needed. Take a screenshot of attendance just in case. All right. So let's get started here. So opacity maps, basically we're using it as a way to cut out the geometry that we have for the label that is unwanted. If you remember in project 6, we took that label, which was basically a cylinder wrapped around the bottle, and we put it on a display layer and hid it because other than that, you know, it's a label and it would hide the, basically hide the glass that we're trying to see inside project 6. So we're going to unhide that for those of you doing the exterior scene. How many of you are doing it here on campus? Exterior, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, how about online? How many of you are doing the exterior scene? So I got 6 here sitting in the classroom that are going to be doing it.
I'll be doing it too.
Okay. That was Nelson, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else? Either everybody's gone, or they're away from the keyboard, or they're not doing it. Okay. So let's talk about the process, or actually what it is. So an opacity map, sometimes called a presence map, sometimes called an alpha channel, a mask, whatever your verbiage happens to be, it's a very simple map. Black is transparent or removed, white is kept, held, or opaque, which means it remains, basically. So this gets plugged into the geometry section of the material. So the geometry section for us has been a pretty busy area, more so than you would think, because we turned on thin-walled for glass. This is where you plug bump maps in, and now you can plug opacity maps into it. Or better yet, if you've got an alpha channel inside a file, you get a dual purpose file. You get one for color, and the other part of it is the transparency, which is the alpha part. So Photoshop is the perfect tool to do this with, because it is a very simple operation. So they can be separate maps, but there's really no reason for what we're going to do it for as far as the wine label. All right, so the first thing we want to do, obviously, is find a wine label. Let me pull up Maya and figure out, I don't remember what I wound up doing for wine. I think it was red wine, but I'll have to see. All right, so we got Laura doing it. Okay, good. All right, so Arnold, there we go. Let me set my project here. Project 7, let's go Zen Garden. So this is lecture 8. Let's do a save as. This will be lecture 10 for me. And I don't care about RenderMan. There we go. All right, so file, save as. Let's go lecture 10. And I'm going to select the ground plane and just throw back the standard material, the Arnold standard material that we have there. Oh, come on. There we go. Arnold standard surface. There we go. Good. All right, so my sphere, I'm going to throw that on a display layer. Let's hide that. That was kind of our guinea pig there. So let's go to the render cam and let me just make sure everybody's happy here. Why? Because it's Maya. Okay, good. All right. So what I want to do now is turn on my wine label layer. And there we go. And this should have the AI standard surface on it. It does. And notice it's not showing up. When that happens, it's usually something caught in the buffer or the memory of the Arnold render view. So just close it, give it a second, open it again, and re-render. There we go. Can be quite frustrating, but it generally will come back and work with us here. All right, so let's assign. First thing we want to do is I'm going to assign a new material to it. And then we'll go look for reference. All right, so Shift T. Let's close this. Shift T, Arnold, AI standard surface. Right, it's label. There we go, wine label. All right. So first thing we want to do is obviously find a red wine label. So let's go to images and Google red wine label texture. All right, so we get a bunch of hits here, which is nice, but make sure in tools you are grabbing as large a file as possible, because this is going to be used as a texture. All right, so I have some, fairly common looking rectangular labels. I've also got one here that is Rocco. It's got a little more interesting shape. It's got a little kind of elevated logo right above the main part of the label. So that's sort of an interesting shape. I always like to find a shape that's interesting, something other than a rectangle or a square personally, because if I'm going to go through the trouble of cutting out the geometry, I want an interesting shape on my label. And really, it's the time to do it. All right, so let's see, what else do we have here? So if you know a type of label or a type of wine that you like Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon, feel free to look for that. You are also allowed to make your own wine label. However, it's got to be a PG label and it's got to match what your render is. You got to make sure you're not making a white wine label and you've got red wine in your glass that says, hey, I didn't pay attention. I really don't want this job. Zinfandel, that's kind of a pink wine. Let's see, what do we got here? These are printable labels. And again, I'm trying to find one as big as possible so that the type inside the label holds up when I render it in the camera. I can actually read it. I should be able to read the writing on it. All right, so I could go with something like this or Rocco. You want to avoid things like this. Anything that looks like it has a watermark on it, because you'll spend all your time trying to get that watermark out. So I'm going to go with Rocco. That's 1109 by 832. That's close to a 1K file. It should be okay. If I were rendering this any larger, I would want a bigger label. So let's see, what's this one? Oh, that's 900. Nope, don't like that. Now, oh yeah, let me go back here. So you may be tempted to go, oh, look, I've got a label, it's a PNG, and it's got no background. Sweet, I can use that. No, because you need to make an alpha channel for it to actually get rid of the geometry of that cylindrical wine label that we have. All it will do is put the label on there and show you that nice cylinder. So you actually need to make an alpha channel. So don't get all excited thinking, great, I found one without a background. No, don't work like that. So let's save image. I'm going to save this to my desktop. This is a JPEG. There we go. Put all this back. All right. So first thing I like to do is, let me just open it in a Mac preview program. All right, so that's good. Now, something else you're going to have to do with a wine label is make sure there's enough of a background all the way around it, because we need that area all the way around the label. You know, if it goes right to the edge, that's not good enough. We have to completely surround the label with a blank area. In this case, we want to match it. It's going to be a white background, which is what we have here. That way we can create a continuous area behind the label that we can use to remove the unwanted geometry. You'll see why in a second. So this looks pretty good. It should work. Let's go to Photoshop. All right, so I'm going to right click, and I should be able to minimize that for now. Let's minimize this. All right, so here's my label. What I'm going to do is take this. This is going to be my source. And I'm going to drop it into my project folder. So you can see I got a bunch of these in here from before. Let's get rid of these. So let's just drop this into my source images folder. There it is. Now I'm going to right click on it and open with Photoshop. So this needs to be done in Photoshop. Really isn't another way to do it as efficiently. All right. So in Photoshop, first thing we want to do is I can see there it is 1109 pixels by 832, 300 DPI, which means it's got plenty of resolution for me to be able to see this when I render it. Now, what I want to do is extend what is called the canvas. That's the area that this image sits on, not the image itself, because if I make the image bigger, it's going to expand the actual size of the label. And I don't want that. I just want to expand the canvas, which is what this label sits on. The reason I want to do that is because I want to get a nice area where I've got enough going all the way around the label so I can make an alpha channel that Maya will read, Arnold will read, and be able to remove the geometry. So I go to Image in Photoshop, and you'll notice I have image size and canvas size. Canvas is what I want. That's the work area in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on that, and notice it shows it to me in pixels. So I could go pixels, I can go inches, and I can go, oh, all right. So maybe 4¼ inches. I usually like to go, well, let's go 4½. And then let's go 3½. I like to expand it quite a bit, just so I'm sure I get enough area around it. Now, you'll notice that at the bottom here, under New Size, there's an anchor point. And that anchor point right now is in the center, which means when I expand this canvas, it's going to expand it horizontally and vertically, up and down. Now, I can change that anchor point simply by clicking in any one of these 9 areas here. So here, it'll go up and down and to the right. Here, it will expand to the right and left and also go up. Like I said, most of the time, you want to expand it probably uniformly in the middle, which is what I want to do. And you want to make sure that your canvas extension color matches your background. So for example, mine had a white background, so I want a white extension. So when I click OK, now notice that it gave me a whole big canvas area all the way around the label. So now I've got plenty of room all this area in here will help Arnold be able to know that I want to remove the geometry on the entire cylinder. All right, any questions so far? Make sense? Zoomosphere? Zoom questions? Okay, Katie's good. Daniel's good. Maxwell's good. Thank you. Brian's good. Deja, thank you. All right, so now what I want to do is select the label itself. So the best way to do that in Photoshop is, anybody, what's one of the best selection tools ever in Photoshop? Yeah, it's the magic wand. The magic wand is awesome, and it's the fourth tool down. Now, you may have object selection, quick selection, but the magic wand is the bomb. That will basically, by default, gives you a tolerance of 32 pixels, which means whichever pixel you select, it will select up to 32 steps in hue, saturation value in any direction, well, in every direction, from that original pixel. So for example, if I click here inside the brown part of the label, notice it selects a lot of stuff, but there's, some of the little spots in here it doesn't select. Now, if you've selected something in Photoshop and you accidentally you accidentally selected it, to deselect, what's the shortcut key? Well, if you're on a Mac, Command D, there you go. Command D if you're on a Mac, Control D if you're in PC. So I don't want to select that. I want to select the actual background. So when I click on it, notice that it selects pretty much the entire white background. So let me kind of zoom in. And looks like I got a little area here where it didn't want to select. So let me do Control D or Command D. So that little area right there. Now, to drop your tolerance down, so for example, you can see I got a little bit of a rough area here, which means it's probably, maybe a little broad. So let's target this. Let's go 16. Let me do Command D. Let's try that again. So it's giving me a better line, but it's still kind of not selecting. Well, it's still got little imperfections here. It looks like a lot of this stuff was just sloppy scanning or a noisy scan where we've got artifacts outside. So what you can do is you can use the simple selection tool up here. Let me kind of zoom in a little bit, Control D. Let me just kind of select that. I want to fill it with white. All I'm trying to do is just clean this up a little. That's a piece of dirt on my screen. Okay, cool. All right, just going around, trying to see if there's any other artifacts that are not smudgies on my screen. All right, let's zoom out a little. And let's try doing that selection again. So there we go. That looks pretty good from back here. I'm sure if I zoom in, I'll see a little bit of noise, but that's kind of what I want. Now, what I've done is selected the background. I've not actually selected the label because what I clicked on was the background. Now, if I try to make an alpha channel with the background selected, here's what I'm going to get. So to create an alpha channel, it's actually quite simple in Photoshop. You go to channels, and basically you'll see you've got an RGB composite channel and then separate red, green, and blue channels. What I want to do is take my selection and create a new channel based on my selection, which is this light rectangle with a dark circle. So if I hover above it, there we go, save selection as channel. If I click on it, this is what I get. Now, remember, black is transparent, white is opaque. Is this going to give me the result I want if I take this in and try and remove it? No. So what I need to do is undo this, go back and invert my selection. So actually, I'm just going to take that channel and trash it. All right, so I've got my background still selected. You know, if I accidentally selected it, I'll just select it again. And what I want to do is go up to select and invert, Shift Command I. What that will do is, instead of selecting the backdrop or the background, it will select the label itself. So now I can go to channels, create a new channel based on my selection. And now when I look at it, notice the background is black and the area where the label is white. That will give me what I want. That is my new channel. So let me go back to RGB. Now, since I've already opened this in Photoshop and it's a JPEG, I'm going to do a save as, save it as a PSD in case I need to come back in here and play around with it again. So File, Save As. Save it as a PSD because I want layers. I want to have access to the file in case I don't need to compress it, uncompress it, compress it again. All right, now that I've got it saved, now I'm going to save this out as a Targa file, but I want to make sure that I choose 32 bits. So File, Save As, and remember in Photoshop, oh, look, it's giving me a chance to save as a Targa. Hey, I'll take it. So let's save it as a Targa. And I'm going to add the word alpha here so I know that this is my processed version and it's got an alpha channel. So hit save. It automatically sees that I've got 4 channels instead of just 3. So it says 32-bit, and that is what you want. Target options, 32-bit, click OK. So I'm going to save my file one more time just to make sure. And let's take a look and make sure we got the right results. So here's our default. It's got that white background. And here's our alpha. You can see it's kind of got that, you know, kind of blurry, transparent background to it. So this tells me my alpha channel is there and it's ready to go. And if I need it, there's my PSD. So now I can quit out of Photoshop. Why? Because Photoshop and Maya don't work well together. Although I did leave Maya open, so I'm sure I've angered the Photoshop gods. and their wrath will be swift and mighty. So one thing we want to take a look at is what happens when we actually go to plug this stuff in. So here's what happens. Our out color, we kind of move this out of the way. Our out color goes into the base color. That's the first thing we plug in. Then we take our alpha channel, we plug it into opacity, but opacity is expecting a 3-channel file, which is very, very weird. Arnold's like the only program or only renderer I know of that does this. An alpha channel is a single channel. So I'm going to show you what happens if you only plug your out alpha into one of these channels. It kind of does it a third of the way, but not completely. You just have to make sure that you are plugging your alpha into all 3 RGB channels of opacity. All right, so first I'm going to put the color map on. Color goes into what? Which part of the material? Yeah, goes into base color. Remember, the weight is the amount and the color is what we want. So base color. So click on that little checker button. That's an input. Create render node. We want a 2D file. So let's go into the hypershade, and I'm going to graph my wine label. So here it is. Right click, graph network. Exactly as I hoped it would look. Out color goes into base color. Very good. Now, what I need to do is plug in my file into color. All right, so in Zen Garden, there's my Rocco. That's the one I just, wait, that's not the right one. I just modified that. No, I don't think so. All right. How come I didn't see all that stuff? Where's this at? There's my alpha channel, source images. Ah, okay, I didn't plug it into the Zen Garden. I plugged it into just source images, which is fine, I'll find it. So I'm in Zen Garden source images. I got to go up a level. And here it is, right there. That's the one I just did today. So this, I'm going to click open. Let's go into perspective. Let's focus in. And now I can see I've got my label on there, but I've also got multiple copies. And it looks a little stretched. So we'll take care of all that, one thing at a time. So first thing I want to do is remove all the extra copies of the label. All right, so that is coming from the place 2D texture. Remember, the place 2D texture controls some of the UV repeating and placement of this file node. So if I click on the place 2D, you can see I have these options called wrap U and wrap V. So first thing I want to do is turn off wrap U and then turn off wrap V. So now I've only got one copy on there. Now, your initial reaction might be, well, we just go back into Photoshop and we stretch the label. Not really, because the label is proportionate. We got it off the internet. It is the way it's supposed to be. It's our UVs that are kind of squashing it. So let's go see what the UVs look like. So I'm going to go up to my UV editor, select my label, and you can see there are my UVs for that cylinder. Now, I know a lot of you are probably horrified that the UVs are hanging outside the 0 to 1 space. Honestly, unless you need to do a collage UV, it doesn't matter. Now, if you're taking something like this into Substance, yes, all your UVs need to be in the 0 to 1 space. But if you're working in Maya, you're not going to a game engine, you're not going back out anywhere else, you can get away with having your UVs hang outside. So for this, what I'm going to do is kind of resize my UVs. I need it to the label itself to be a little wider or it to be a little more compressed vertically. So let's grab this. Let's just see what this looks like. So I'm going to select my UVs in the UV editor. And I can scale them. Now, your first instinct might be to, well, let's make it a little less vertically. So you might want to do this, but all you're doing is filling up that 0 to 1 space more. What I want to do is stretch it out a little bit more. Okay, that's a little bit better. That looks a little more like that. Now, let me right click, go back to object mode, close my UV editor for a second. Let's talk about how big that label should be. That label should conform to standard marketing visual appearance, which means we should be able to see that label. If it were side by side next to other bottles, we should be able to see the entire label to be able to read it. And that's just good marketing because, you know, as a consumer, you're hit with, you know, like 400 bottles of wine. You know, you want the label to be accessible, to be readable by the person who is shopping. So you make sure that the label takes up as much space as possible, but not too much. Now, for our purposes, we need to be able to see the wine bottle on all 4 sides of the label, meaning you don't want the label to go to the very edge where we can't see that you've gotten rid of all of the unwanted part of the label. So, anybody has any questions, take a look at our SAL look development guide. All right, well, there we go. OneDrive being a little iffy. All right, so So that is, the entire label must be visible at a glance and not a wrap around the bottle. The glass of the wine bottle must be visible on all four sides of your wine label. So just make sure that we can see the wine label on all four sides. Let me minimize that. Let's go back here. This looks like it'll work. Might even be able to make it a little bigger proportionately. But let's do the rest of the job first. So let's render this out. All right, so there's my label. Looks like it could be a little bit bigger. So I don't want to make the label itself bigger. I'm going to make the UVs a little bigger so that it takes up more space. So let's go back to UV editor. Let's select all the UVs. To scale it up a little bit. There we go. Can see it on the edge right there. And I'm also rotating the geometry a little, just to kind of center it. There we go. All right, so we've got it in there. Now we want to be able to get rid of all this unwanted area around the label. So to do that, we are going to basically bring up Hypershade again and graph our wine label network. So here's our opacity section here. You'll notice in the opacity section, it is expecting an RGB file, but our alpha is only a 2-channel file. It's black and white, which you would normally plug into just a single slot. So here's what it would look like if I only plug it into, first off, if I try and plug out alpha into opacity, notice it hides on me. That's because this is a black and white. It's trying to go into an RGB. Arnold's not going to have any of it. So if I take out alpha, plug it into the red channel, let me close that and open it again. There we go. So this is what happens if I just get rid of red. All right, but I want to get rid of all of them. RGB, they're all equal, it makes it white. Looks really eerie. You have to plug it into all 3 parts of the channel. So once I do that, now all the label geometry is gone except for where my wine label shape is. Does that make sense? All right, now, the only other thing I probably want to do here is I'm having trouble reading underneath the Rocco, and that's because my wine label's getting blown out. there's too much light intensity on it. And I don't want to change my lighting just for the label. I'm going to do what I did to the table, which is adjust the base weight. The base weight allows me to control how much light the geometry is accepting. At 1.0, it's accepting all of the available light in the scene. But what I want to do is I want to kind of limit it so that I can read the actual title of the wine under the label. So I'm just going to start by lowering it. I usually like to lower it a little bit at a time. Let me keep that image. Let's try 0.8. A little bit better. Honestly, I'm probably going to have to go down a lot more, considering how low I had to go for the table. There we go. Well, let me go back to 1. All right, there we go. So it's back to 0.7 here. So I can see it's a little bit better. Let's try 0.6. Now, you have to remember for this wine label, it has specularity on it. So let me go back to my reference. All right, so it doesn't look all that glossy. See, we can actually find one that's in an actual photo. Yeah, not too reflective. So let's knock this down a whole lot. I don't need all that much reflectivity. And if I do have any reflectivity, it's probably going to be pretty rough. And let's go down one more notch. I kind of like it at 0.6. Looks like it matches the lighting environment that I have. That's a little too bright. At least I can read a little bit here. There we go. That's not bad. All right, questions? Make sense? Okay, any questions out there in Zoomosphere? So if you're doing the exterior scene, which is the Zen garden, you're going to need to do a opacity map for the wine label. So Nelson's good, Blaine's good, thank you, Jerry's good, okay. So again, we started in Photoshop. Actually, we started in Google searching for a wine label. We found Rocco, had an interesting shape rather than just a rectangular shape. So it looks like they got several different kinds of labels. That one would be pretty cool if I could find it. Okay. So that takes care of that part. We're all set to go. Let's close that. Well, actually, we get rid of these. And let's talk about our next step. So cutout opacity, very powerful tool. Don't always need it, but it's good to know that you can remove parts of geometry to get interesting shapes for labels, stickers, decals. Now, let's talk a little bit about projection mapping. Projection mapping allows us to take a 2D texture, something that exists flat, be able to put it on a surface and move it around in 3 dimensions. So for example, if we had a sticker or a label here, which we got a bunch. So I'm going to go demonstrate something on the board. All right, so I have this here, and I put it on using just traditional UV and substance or something. I take it out, put it into Maya. Looks good, but the boss goes, it's kind of put it on the left side. So you could go back into substance, or if you had done it in Maya with layering or using a 2D texture projected, we could take this and move it in Maya. Now, if we have it on a wall, we can move it around any wall that the geometry is assigned to, or that this texture is assigned to. So, for example, here, or I want to move it here. As long as they have the same material, I can move it wherever I want in 3D space. So it enables us to take a flat 2D texture, be able to move it around in 3D space inside Maya to conform to wherever we want to basically place it. Disinfect my hands because that felt nasty, especially the wall. Don't touch the wall. All right. So we've got a 2D logo here. If I put it on as is using a texture mapping method, it's just going to sit there. I could move it around a little, go into the place 2D, move it around using numbers, not very friendly, not very user-friendly. But if I take that same object, put it on a projection, now our projection will make it mobile in 3D. So now, with this, we still get our file node. We still get a place 2D, but they are basically going for a ride on our projection. So this allows us to move in X, Y, and Z, all thanks to this little place 3D. So kind of think of it, if you're having trouble kind of visualizing this, think of it like you get into your car, you drive around, right? You drive around, you're pretty much stuck on Earth unless you go flying off a cliff or over an embankment, or you catch air unintentionally. You're in the air, but eventually you're going to go down again. But think of it like you put your car on a helicopter, and now your car not only moves in X and Y, but it also moves in Z. If you're Z up, or if you're Y up like Maya, you go up and down. Does that make sense? So very powerful tool. We don't use this for putting on ordinary textures. This is only for small decals, stickers, things that will probably be moved around, or you may want mobile. So I see a lot of you have stickers all over your Macs. That would be perfect because you could layer all of that on a layered texture and put as many projections on, and you can move them all around wherever you want. The downside is if your computer moves, you need to parent all of those projections in the geometry so that they all stay in the same place. Because if you pick up your computer, you will basically pick it up and move it, and all your stickers will still be there in midair. So that's why you need to parent that stuff to the geometry so that they all move together. So like I said, very powerful, but it has a few caveats. Now, when you go to make a file node, just like I did for the label, I left-clicked on file, and that gave me a traditional place 2D texture map node. In order to make a file node 3D or make it as a projection instead of a texture, you need to right-click on file, and that's where you'll get the option. So for example, instead of guinea pigging this, let me just create a new blank scene. And I'm just going to throw down a plane. Let's assign a new AI standard surface to it. There we go. So let's say I want to put a sticker on here. So if I do, that's going to go into base color. So in base color, if I go to my create render node, go to 2D textures, if I just left click on file, this is basically what I'll get. I'll get a file node, I'll get a place 2D. So let me plug in let's plug in the SAL logo. So that is downloadable if you haven't downloaded it. Inside Project 7, down at the bottom. So if I want to see this, I have to hit the 6 key. So there it is. Kind of looks gray, but it is basically white. Now, if I want to move this around, that's going to be a little tricky. I've got this. So if I want to move it around, let's try translate it over 0.25. There you go. If I overshoot it, notice it falls off the one end and comes around on the other end. So there's really no way to just grab it, move it, scale it, resize it. So if I want coverage, I don't want it to be as big. There we go. But the problem with that is now I've got all this other stuff in the background. Let's go back to 1-to-1. Put this at 0. So now we go back and let me break this connection. Oh yeah, how do I break a connection? I plug something in and I go, oh crap, I don't want that there. Yeah. Okay, so I go to base, color, right click color, right on the word color, and that's how I do it. Thank you. I can, but that's going to move my UVs. What happens if I have something else under it? That's going to move those UVs also. So like I have a wood texture there and I want to put graffiti on that wood texture. Well, if I go moving UVs around, that's also going to move my wood texture too. So this is why you don't want to do that. It is possible, but you generally don't want to do it. It's easier to do it in your scene in the viewport. Now, let's do this the other way. And now what I'm going to do is go into base color, click on the checker button. That brings up my create render node. If I want to create it as a projection, I have to go 2D still. I go to file, but I don't left click, I right click. That gives me an option. That gives me a contextual menu. So now I go down to create as projection. Remember, you got to right click on file to get that contextual menu. Gives me an alternate set of selections. So now I create as projection. Let me graph my network again here. And there we have it. I've got a projection. My file is riding in the projection. And there's my place 3D. So in the file, let's go plug in that standard SAL logo. One with that nice white background. There we go. So you say to yourself, whoa, wait a minute. That doesn't look anything like the logo. What happened? So the first instinct is to undo it or go back, redo it. But don't do that. Here's the reason it looks like this. When you create a projection, it gives you a movable projector. And your projector looks an awful lot like an area light. Pull it up out of the ground. Now that area light, or no, I'm sorry, not area light, that projector is not an area light because of this diamond in the lower left corner. It has a little pointer to show you where it is projecting. Right now, it is projecting across the surface. It needs to be aimed at the surface that you want it to project onto. Just like if you took a flashlight and had a decal on your flashlight and were shining it around. So I want to rotate this. I'm going to rotate it down. And basically, I want it to be 90 degrees from the surface. So you can see it's rotating in X. So, and it's negative. So let's go negative 90. So there we are. So if I get out of rotate, now I can move it around wherever I want. But notice I've got the same problem I had with the label. Too many copies. How do I get rid of too many copies? Okay, so where do I find that though? So remember, whenever you create a file, you also get a place 2D. Here's your file, here's your place 2D. The place 2D is what is doing it. And notice it's only repeating once. And you say, what? Wait, how's that possible? I have like, 100 of them sitting on my plane. It kind of looks like a contact sheet. That's because we're wrapping that small little logo across the entire surface until it fills it up. So we want to turn off wrap U and wrap V. And now we have a single decal. We can move it anywhere we want. I can scale it. Want to make it bigger? Want to make it smaller? I can do that. Now you'll notice that I still have that white background behind the SAL logo, but where my logo does not fill up the entire surface now, I've got this really dark gray area around it. Anybody want to take a guess what's going on with that? Well, if I click on the surface, I still have the AI standard assigned to it. So it does have, remember, it's still all one surface. Can you say that again? Good question. Let's see. Well, in order to do that, let's create a little dome light here. And let's see what happens. Yep, it shows up. Well, let's see. Well, it's all got the same material. So, yes. I don't have an alpha channel in this. So I can't. And projections don't like alpha channels, which is kind of why I didn't do a projection on the label. And also I wanted to get rid of the geometry. So, good thoughts. I like your, troubleshooting. So here's something you haven't come across before. Inside the file node, wherever the texture does not cover the entire surface, there is something in the file node called color balance, and there is a default color in that color balance, which means if you've got a logo or a decal that does not take up the entire 0 to 1 space and does not fill the geometry, it needs to put something there because the material's still there. You can't have a material with nothing assigned to it. So it uses default color, which is 50% gray. Now that works all fine and well, but if I want my SAL logo to blend into the background, what color is the background of my logo? White. So what I need to do is make my default color white. So now when I render it out, all I see is the black SAL. Does that make sense? So when you're doing projections, you're going to turn off wrap UNV because usually you want a unique little sticker or label, or you want to put graffiti somewhere in particular. When you do that, though, it's not going to cover the entire surface like we're used to. It's not going to wrap all the way around it anymore. So we need to have an area with default color to basically have it blend in with what's there. Now, this is going to be really important when we start layering stuff, because we can now layer stuff and get rid of solid white or solid black using a blend mode. And that will allow us to have things like a wooden background or concrete or brick if you want to put graffiti on there. All right. So this kind of brings us into layering. Because in Maya, if we're going to do stuff like this, we want to be able to layer it. And the reason we're layering it in Maya is because we want to be able to move it around. If I do it in Photoshop or I do it in Substance, I got to bake my maps out, bring it in, put it on the surface, render it, see if it works. Now, generally, if you're working in Substance, you're in 3D anyway, you're probably going to put it where you want it. But if something needs to be movable, you're probably going to want to keep it in Maya as a layer. So Maya's layering system is a little strange and antiquated, but it still functions. A lot of people don't like it. Can't blame them. It really is kind of clunky. It's like 1980s. But like I said, it's still functional. So the main difference really is Maya's layering system is like Photoshop, only it fell over on its side, which is how we expect Maya to work. How's Maya running? Oh, it fell over on its side. Oh, so it quit out on you 50 times. Yeah. All right, well, so Maya's layering is horizontal rather than vertical. Okay, in Photoshop, top layer, bottom layer. In Maya, the left is the top layer, the right is the bottom layer. If you want to create a new layer in Photoshop, what do? Yeah, press the plus button, or I got a little older version of the interface down here. I had a little upturned page, but yeah, the plus button. That will create a new layer. Usually put it on top of the previous layer. Well, in Maya, we don't have a plus button. All you do is click anywhere inside this area right here. Now, in Photoshop, you want to move a layer around, pretty simple. Left click, drag, go take it up or down. In Maya, you want to move a layer, can't left click, got a middle mouse. Why? Because it's Maya. All right, so bullet point, move a layer, you need to middle mouse drag. You want to remove a layer in Photoshop, select the layer, hit delete, hit the trash can down at the bottom, it goes away. In Maya, if you hit delete, it will just look at you. So if you want to remove a layer in Maya, you need to basically click the little X right underneath of the layer icon. Now, guess what happens if you miss that little X? You make a new layer. And guess what happens when you make a new layer? You get aggravated and you start clicking and you make 50 new layers. And then you got to go back and delete them because unfortunately in Maya, you can't multiple select layers and hit delete. So Maya is testing your patience. Remember, every once in a while, you're working on your computer, a little green light goes on, that's Maya watching you. That's not the NSA or anybody hacking into your computer, it's Maya, waiting to take over. So, we also have some attributes down at the bottom. There's 4 of them down here. So whichever layer you want is selected. Well, you basically alter a layer based on your selection. You select a layer, the attributes are unique to that layer. So in color, you can change the color swatch, which is kind of a really disgusting green. You can also map in something in there. The alpha works like opacity in Photoshop. We have a blend mode, which works just like blend mode in Photoshop. And we have a button that says layer invisible, whereas in Photoshop, we get the nice little eye icon. All right. So what I'm going to do is just go into the hypershade, and I'm going to create. First off, let me clear up this graph here. And what I'm going to do is basically create a blank layered texture. Now, layered textures can be accessed. Generally, what you want to do with a layered texture is plug it into the file node of your material. So right now in here, I've got a projection. So let me delete that or break the connection there. And let me get rid of that too. There we go. All right, so let me go to base, color, click in there. So 2D material or 2D textures, 3D textures, environment textures. Maya's layered texture exists under other textures. That's the only thing that's in there. So if I click on it, now I've got a layered texture. So let me graph my network here. And you can see I've got a layered texture plugged into my base color. Notice there is no transform or placement information. This layered texture is purely a container. It can hold 2D textures, 3D textures, it doesn't care. It's only a container for you to layer stuff. Now, here inside the layer texture attributes, I create as many layers as I want. Delete them. Like I said, if you miss, you go, "Argh." Be patient. So if I want to change a layer's properties, I select the layer. And for example, let's make this one red. And let's make this last one blue. So now I've got red, green, and blue. Green is my top layer. That's why that is visible. If I select green and turn off visibility, now I got red. If I select red, turn off visibility, now I got blue. By default, the blend mode is set to be what's called over, which means the top layer blocks everything underneath of it. It doesn't allow any of the information to come through. Now, here's green, here's red. If I drop the opacity of green down, it starts to let some of that red through. Whereas if I turn it all the way down, I have nothing but red. So it allows the layer underneath to ghost through. If I want to move my layers around, I want to do red, green, blue. I want red on top. I have to middle mouse click on red and drag it to the left. Or I can drag green underneath red. Doesn't really matter what order you do it in, as long as you wind up with the right layer order that you want. Does that make sense? All right, so it's really not that difficult. These are just holders for you to plug something into. Now, if you want a solid color, like for example, suppose you're doing the wall. So I got a green wall here on my left, your right, greenish. I want to put a sticker on there. Well, I need to have a couple of layers. One layer for that color green, that'll be my bottom layer. And then my decal or sticker is going to be on top of it, and that will be my projection. But in order for that projection to allow the color of the wall underneath to show through, I need to use what is called a blend mode. Very similar to what we did in Photoshop with the brick wall when we used the high pass filter. Remember, I made a high pass filter just to sharpen the pixels, but it created a really ugly gray. I had to use a blend mode called overlay to allow it to show through. Well, I need to use another kind of blend mode if I want to remove the background of my decal, which in this case is going to be my SAL logo, and it's going to be white. So let's talk a little bit about common blend modes. There are actually 3 common blend modes, but honestly, you will probably use 2. And of the 2, you will use one probably more than the other. Right, so the 2 main blend modes you are probably going to wind up using are going to be add and multiply. So let's figure out which one is which and what does what. And it's going to involve some very simple math. And I mean simple math. Like addition and addition and multiplication. It's really that simple. So first off, black is equal to what number? Right. So in a computer, black is equal to 0. White is equal to what? 1. All right, good. So what I'm going to do is plug 0 and 1 into each one of these equations. So let's do 0 here, 1 here, 0 here, 1 here. Now, the second position is basically going to be a placeholder for a random color or a texture. In this case, it's going to be our SAL logo. Very simple. It's a black and white logo, white background, black lettering. Somebody give me a random number. It doesn't matter what it is. It just can't be 0 or 1. 24. I like that. Think big. 24. So now let's plug 24 into here. And let's do the math. So 0 plus 24 is what? 24. How about 1 plus 24? 25. All right. I told you it was really hard. All right, multiply 0 times 24. 0, 1 times 24. 24. So there are 2 instances here where our texture has not changed. Under add, it is this one. Let me get a different color. Well, let's go with that. So it is this one. And under multiply, it is this one. So here's what's going on. So for example, if our logo, which is black SAL type, if we have a black background behind that SAL logo, we would be in a lot of trouble because it's black type on top of a black background. So you need some kind of contrasting background. If you're going to have a black background, you probably have a white lettering. So let's do this. Now, if I've got a white background, I want to counter that, and I'm going to put a black lettering. So now I've got SAL logo, black background, white type, white background, black type. Depending on what I'm going to do with it or what I'm going to use it on is going to determine which blend mode I use. So if I have a white background, I want to get rid of white, which is the number 1, and keep the black, in this case, or keep my logo, which in this case is 24. I'm going to use multiply because the white gets multiplied out and all I'm left with is the black type. Now, on the reverse of that, if I have a black background and I've got a white SAL logo, I want to use add because I want to remove the black, keep the white or my logo. And to do that, I need to use add. Now, honestly, these are the two most common. Of the two, you're going to use multiply probably a whole lot more than you will add because a lot of logos, decal, stickers have white backgrounds. And you probably want to remove the white background. So if you have a choice and you make the wrong choice, you got a 50-50 shot. So for example, you forget, oh, I can't remember. I have a white background, I got black logo, or I've got a green logo, I want to keep it. What do I do? I use add. You put add in there and it gives you not the result you want. Change it to multiply. You got a 50-50 shot. Does that make sense? Questions in the Zoomosphere? Does that kind of make sense for everybody? Jerry's good. All right, Maddie's good. All right, so let's put that into use and let's go do, oops, let's bring that back. Let's go do that here. Really? Stop doing stuff. There we go. Okay. So now, let's render this out. There we go. Got a nice red background. Good. All right. So which color should I keep? Blue? All right. So we'll keep blue. And I want to put my SAL logo on top of there. Now, in order to do that, I obviously need a blank layer. I could have kept the other two layers, used one of them for my decal, but I just decided to get rid of it just to make it a simple demonstration. So if I want to create a new layer, what do I do? Yeah, click anywhere here where it says layer texture attribute. Now, Since this is going to be my decal, this has got to be in which layer position, top or bottom? Top. So I need it to be on the left side. So let's drag it over. And you can see it covers my blue up, but don't worry about it. Now here, this is where we want to assign our SAL logo. So I have to make sure I select the right layer, go to color, and click the input button here. So now that brings up my create render node. I know I want to do this as a projection. So what do I need to do to make this a projection? On what? On what? On file. Very good. I right click on file because if I left click, it's going to just drop it in as a 2D and I won't have any 3D movement. So I right click on top of file, create as projection. And let's see what we have here in our hypershade. This is going to be fun. So there's our layered texture. There's our projection. There's our file. This is where I want to plug in my SAL logo. So let's go grab it. There it is. Now, don't forget, when you have that projection made and you've got your file in there, it drops in this little, this is actually the place 3D that the projector's riding around on. So we want to pull this up out of the ground and aim it at our geometry. So it looks like an area light, but it's not because it's got a diamond in the lower left corner. So I want to aim it or rotate it down. I can see it's rotating. I want to go 90 degrees. So it's there. Now I want this to be a unique individual sticker. I don't want a whole bunch of them. So how do I get rid of all those copies? Yeah, so I'm going to go to the place 2D that's plugged into the file. Place 2D, what do I want to do here? Uncheck wrap U, uncheck wrap V. Now, notice I have this really dark background here. I need that background area to be the same color as what's behind my logo. And my logo's got what kind of background? White. So how do I get this to match that? Default color in in the file node. So file node, you scroll down, go to color balance, default color. And if you make the wrong choice and go black, well, there you go. You go white, that part's done. We have one thing left. Now we want to use a blend mode. So let's go back to our layer texture. Right here. So how do I remove the white that's behind my logo? What's that? Multiply. Well, if we can try add. Oops, did the opposite. Let's go multiply. There it is. So too dark, well, you know, that's the color we got. Lowered a little. So there's my logo. Move it around. scale it. I can rotate it. This were assigned to a cube, I could move it to any face on the cube. I just have to make sure my projector is pointing in the right direction. All right, does that kind of make sense? So this blue background could be a placeholder for an actual texture. So for example, I could have a wooden texture plugged in here. Now, I'm not going to plug it in using another projection. For stationary textures or textures that cover the entire surface, you don't want to use a projection. We only use them for small little details. So for example, let's throw in, I think I got a texture here, walnut texture. There we go. Whoops. I don't like that. Let's do this. There we go. So now I have my SAL on there. So let's turn that down. There we go. All right, one other thing I can show you that you probably want to do is, a lot of times if you've got graffiti like this, you usually want to have the background bleed through a little bit. And in order to do that, especially if you're not trying to make it like it's got a white sticker or, you know, it is a white sticker. But for this, I want to have that look like it's been on the surface and the surface is starting to bleed through, or the graffiti or whatever's on top of it's wearing. So to do that, I can basically go into my layer, select the top layer, and start adjusting the alpha. As I lower the alpha, now what's underneath is going to start to come through. That's going to add a little realism sometimes to what you've got, especially if it's done in marker or maybe paint. It started to be absorbed into the wood, or just over time and, you know, elements, it started to wear away. All right, does that make sense? So this is sort of similar to what you guys probably wound up doing in Substance, except, you know, the tools are a little more elegant there. You're doing it in 3D. You're making all the maps at once. Here, you got to have the maps ready in Maya and throw them on. All right. Any questions? This is a good time to take a break. We'll take a break. I'll come back and I'll show you guys how to do projection on the table outside, and then how to do it on the thermos in the interior. Anybody doing the interior, you need to have a projection in there. And if you've already done it in Substance on the thermos, you can use the SAL logo or your initials or something, put it on the wall, put it on the computer desk, it doesn't matter. All right, anybody got any questions? Campus? Pretty good. About Zoom, anybody have any questions before we go on break?
I'm good.
All right, thank you. So this was just a quick demo file. And let's see, let's come back at, we got 3:15. How about, oh yeah, probably by the time we get out of here, it'll be 5 of. All right, so come back at 3:15. We'll pick up, we'll do the demo on putting a projection on table. You could also do it to the cutting board. And we'll do one on the interior too. All right, so as always, I have to end the video and the session so I can render it out.